All right, welcome everybody. Let's jump right into chapter 1. Let me share my screen with you real quick. Here we go. All right, so before we dive in, if you ever want to learn more about Psych or internship opportunities or guest speakers around campus, the Psych department does a really good job of reaching out. A couple of resources if you're curious about this at all. But definitely if you're a Psych major or a Psych minor, for sure. If you text PSYC to 77222, they'll shoot you little text messages about maybe once a week or so, probably even less frequently than that. Just when there's different internship events, speakers, social events around campus related to psychology, things like that. Or another great resource is psychology.apu.edu. It lists 300 different psychology-related careers and all that great stuff, all of our different faculty and their research interests and all that. So anyway, if this is interesting to you, feel free to check it out. If not, without further ado, let's jump in. So when you sign up for a course like this, you're probably wondering, like, what is psychology? What am I getting myself into? And psychology is a little loaded, especially with those like TV shows like mediums and reading people's minds and all these kind of like brain tricks and stuff like that. So your first impression of Psych might be something like, well, will this teach me how to read people's minds? Absolutely not, but it will teach you how to predict people's behavior. You might think about like serial killers or psychopaths and sociopaths, like Hannibal Lecter, you know, from like, what's that movie? Silence of the Lambs. We will learn about psychopaths. We'll learn about sociopaths. We'll learn about different personality disorders. We will learn about the difference between psychopaths and sociopaths and what the differences between those are, why it's considered a psychological disorder, and so on. But we'll learn a whole lot more than that. We will talk about therapy. Thank God therapy is not like this. It's not lay on a couch, stare at a wall. That looks boring as sin. That's terrible. Instead, there are a ton of different therapies out there. And not all of them are just like, so tell me how you feel. A lot of these therapies are kind of in your face, kind of challenging you, like, hey, you're thinking about the world wrong. You think that you're worthless and you're not. So they challenge those irrational thoughts that people have. Some other therapies are really behavioral, which means like you go on a field trip with your therapist. You have a fear of spiders, you can cure a phobia in a single day if you wanted to. So it's like you go to a zoo, you put spiders on your hands, you do virtual reality, like there's all sorts of cool kind of behavioral therapies as well. There's cognitive therapies, there's talk therapies. We will talk about a lot of different therapies, and thank goodness that psychology is a science and they're actually doing research to see which therapies are most effective. And depending on someone's diagnosis, what psychological disorders or adjustment issues they might be experiencing, different therapies are going to be more or less effective. So anyway, we'll talk a whole lot about psych disorders and therapy in this class. The first person that probably comes to mind when you think of psych is maybe Freud, Sigmund Freud. His parents called him Golden Siggy. I kid you not. He had a really interesting life. He was an ideas guy. He just threw out a bunch of theories. The vast majority of his theories were completely wrong, really misguided. But one of the things that Freud did a nice job of is just come up with these kind of outlandish theories that other folks would kind of follow suit and start testing his claims. Like, you know what? I don't think kids are like sexually fantasizing about their parents, Freud. I think you're wrong about that. So instead of just taking his word for it, actually designed those studies, followed kids around, surveyed them to really develop the science of psychology that it is today. So anyway, we will talk about Freud a little bit. I'll spend more time talking about his theories that are true. Like there is an unconscious aspect of people's personality. People do have unconscious attitudes that impact their behavior. So Freud was right about that. But a lot of stuff with kids, he was just flat out wrong. So anyway, we will talk a little bit about Freud, but mostly in the context of kind of like a historical picture. We will also talk about the brain, different lobes of the brain, What happens if someone's brain is damaged, if they experience a concussion, for instance, what's going on in the brain. If someone has a neurological disorder, kind of what's going on? Why can't they feel things? Why can't they respond? Why are they having different aphasias and can't speak or can't hear language the way that they used to? We will talk about antidepressants, Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil. All of those are called SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, to make people less depressed. So we'll talk about what is serotonin, what is a neurotransmitter, how are those neurons working in the brain that cause people to experience everything in their world. So anyway, we will cover a lot of different ground in this course, and share even more than what your preconceptions might be. So without further ado, here's a formal definition for your notes. What is psychology? It is the scientific study of mind and behavior. And there's a couple of words I bolded and underlined in there because, man, I do not want them to get lost on you. Psychology is scientific. It's not Freud's theories. It's not just some old white guy sitting on a couch saying, you know what, I think people do that. Hey, write that down somewhere. That's not what psychology is all about. Psychology is a science. So what that means is you don't just create these theories, you actually gather data, right? You put people in a room and see what happens. You survey people about their personality, and then you use that to predict the quality of their relationships, for instance. So psychology as a science is constantly kind of changing. We're learning more and more about what makes people tick. And the more that we learn, then the better able we are to predict when people are going to be aggressive, when people are going to engage in terrorist attacks, but also on the bright side, like what makes people happy. There's so many people that want to be happy, but they're making decisions with their lives that aren't supported by psychological science at all. In fact, the whole field of psychology has this preponderance of evidence of like what makes people happy. And we'll talk about that, right? From a research perspective. So anyway, psychology is scientific. It's the scientific study of mind and behavior, how people think, how they feel, how they process, how they perceive the world around them, all that's going on in their mind. But also, if you zoom out, what are they doing, right? What are their actions? What are their behaviors? What is predicting how close they stand next to someone? What's predicting whether they smile or not? What's predicting whether someone's going to thrive in this job or not? In fact, there's a whole lot of applied psychology careers that take this knowledge of the scientific study of mind and behavior and start using it, right? They use it in Match.com. They use it in businesses to kind of predict what people are going to do. We will also talk about learning, right? We'll talk about how people learn and acquire information over time. Some of the early models about like what makes people so addicted to certain reinforcers in the world, like why some people go to Vegas and will just sit there, hour after hour, hitting that slot machine over and over and over again for days on end, and spend like thousands of their own dollars. Like what makes them like sit there and keep engaging in this behavior over and over and over again of losing money. A lot of those initial models that we'll talk about were originally studied with rats and pigeons and animals and banana slugs. Like people are social creatures, right? So some of those early studies to figure out learning were conducted on animals and then later applied to people. Some of those applications were a little odd, like B.F. Skinner, who created this sort of box here that has a little lever for the rat to press. What B.F. Skinner could do is kind of change some of the settings in that box. So like a food pellet would pop down every time the rat pressed the lever, or a food pellet would pop down every time a red light came on, for instance, right? And see what sort of behavior happens. When B.F. Skinner had kids himself, believe it or not, he created his own little Skinner box for his babies, thinking that, hey, if the baby's crying, we can change something. We can change the temperature in there. We can turn a fan on. We can add a blanket. We can do different things, play a song, kind of using some of this technology to change people's behavior. But go figure, on Amazon, no one really wanted to buy this giant box for their baby to live in. So anyway, some of these applications really work. Some of them, like this one, are kind of bizarre. But anyway, we will talk a lot about not just learning about psychology, but who cares? How is this going to transform your life? How is it going to apply to your relationships? A lot of you guys aren't psych majors, and that's awesome. How are you going to use psychology in business or arts or like any other major that you're in, like nursing, for instance? So what do psychologists do, right? Besides study the mind and behavior? Well, most psychologists are clinical or counseling psychologists, which is just a fancy way of saying that they're helpers, right? They want to help people. Your clinical and counseling psychologists, those technically they're two different types of psychologists, but they tend to get lumped together, just the helpers out there. Clinical psychologists typically work with severe diagnoses or patients that have real challenges interacting in daily life. So if someone is schizophrenic, for instance, and they're having delusions, right, thinking that people are coming after them. If they're schizophrenic and they have hallucinations, right, they're feeling things on their body, or they're seeing things or hearing voices. If they have a split personality, right, what's referred to as dissociative identity disorder, right, if their self is fracturing into different aspects of themselves, so they don't remember what they're doing, like that's a pretty strong diagnosis. A clinical psychologist would specialize helping someone with like bipolar and like those more kind of severe diagnoses. Whereas on campus here, even in the University Counseling Center, you have a bunch of counseling psychologists that help people with just adjustment, like adjusting to college, being homesick, adjusting to life after college and not knowing what they want to do with the rest of their lives, like, or adjusting to the loss of someone that they loved, or a bad breakup, or, like feeling uncertain about what they want to major in, right? They're counseling psychologists that help people, that don't have diagnosable psychological disorders, but are just going through something, right? They're just going through a hard time just adjusting, and counseling psychologists can really help those folks out. Anyway, there are 25 different psychology faculty in our psychology department, and a lot of them are clinical and counseling psychologists. Myself, I'm a research psychologist, and my research is in the subfield of social psychology. So I study relationships and prejudice, why people fall in love, why people cheat on their partners, why people do shady stuff when they're dating, right? And later on today, we will talk more about what research psychologists do. They apply a ton of different research methods to kind of figure out, like, what are people thinking? What are people feeling? What are they actually doing? Sometimes it makes sense to bring people into the office and ask them, hey, kind of one-on-one interview, what's going on? Or it might make sense to email someone a survey or shoot it to their smartphone and let them do it right then and there. Or better yet, what if we did an experiment where we brought people into a laboratory and we like turned off all the lights and saw what people do, or change the temperature in the room to see if temperature causes some sort of change later on. Right? Your research psychologists are generating all of the knowledge that fills your general psychology textbook. So once they generate all of these knowledge, then clinical psychologists can kind of use it to help people. Or the third type of psychologists out there are called applied psychologists. And they're basically reading the research that's being generated by the research psychologists and then using it in their real life. These applied psychologists might work for, let's say, like Match.com was created by an applied psychologist. eHarmony, the same way. They claim there's a special algorithm, right? The special formula that can predict what person you were gonna hit it off with. It's not a special algorithm. I can tell you what it is, right? In fact, in our social psychology chapter, we'll talk all about the research of what draws people together. It makes relationships likely to form and maintain or last entire lifetime, and why some couples break up, right? Like is it true that opposites attract? No, not at all. In fact, the more dissimilar you are to someone, the more you dislike them. Instead, it's not this opposites attract, garbage that grandma liked to talk about. It's similarity breeds liking. It's birds of a feather. It's So it's not surprising that websites like Match.com and eHarmony will give you a survey about your own values, your own personality traits, and then pair you up with other people that are very similar to you in those same regards. So anyway, these applied psychologists do a really nice job of applying research, applying knowledge about psychology to make the world better. Applied psychologists, another example would be applied psychology in business. There's a type of psychologist out there called an industrial organizational psychologist, and they're applied. They apply psychology to know who to hire, who to fire, how to make sure that their employees are really satisfied at work, right? And not quitting and turning over and things like that. There are applied psychologists on college campuses when it comes to like binge drinking behavior, right? They know that like, when people kind of drink in excess, they are kind of drinking so much, they heighten risk for making poor decisions like unsafe sexual practices, operating a vehicle, DUIs, things like that. And what's interesting is when you kind of ask college students, hey, do you enjoy drinking in excess? Individually, if you ask someone one-on-one, they're like, personally, no. Like, I don't like drinking in excess because I have the hangover the next morning, or I'm throwing up everywhere, or like it just ruins my whole weekend, or like you're waking up the next day and you're like, oh, who did I text? What did I say? What did I do? Kind of dealing with that sort of aftermath. But what's interesting is even though like a bunch of college students individually don't like drinking in excess, as soon as you kind of get them together in a college dorm, it's like, that's the norm, right? That's what they're seeing on TV. That's what they think other people want to do. So when they kind of get together, they all drink in excess, which is this kind of pluralistic ignorance. Each individual student there doesn't want to binge drink, but they think that everyone else does. So even though each of them individually don't, they just misperceive the room, right? They think that everyone else wants to drink in excess. So just kind of sharing that research, knowing about it, then you can apply some of those findings to, change the kind of drinking culture on college campuses, to make people less likely to make, potentially bad decisions for them. So anyway, one of the things I love most about psychology is the fact that it is applied. I will take no offense if you're like raising your hand, you're like, who cares, right? How does this relate to my field of nursing? How does this relate to arts? Like, yeah, like those are the questions to be asking. And I want this course to haunt you in the best way. After this course, I want you to be kind of thinking about it and like driving on the way home from class, like thinking about the psychology, think about your relationships, the other drivers, your career, like all of those sort of connections. So this course isn't just one more kind of checklist to graduate, but something that's going to let you, eventually become a better parent, a better partner, a better employee, and better boss, right? By understanding people and what makes them tick. And this gets played out over and over and over again, especially in research. You see psychology being a hub discipline, meaning when you look at all the research articles that psychology is kind of pumping out, because it's a science, right? They're doing research, and you start looking at which other fields are citing them, you see that psychology articles are being cited all over the place. They're being cited in chemistry and biology about neurotransmitters and lobes of the brain and what's going on there. You see nursing really kind of picking up on that. You see it in social science, where you're talking about kind of, prejudice and hatred and the dark side, and like what makes people kind of hate one another. Psychology has a ton to say about it. And in fields like medicine, 1/3 of people who get tested for HIV or AIDS never go back to find out what the results are. Meaning like 1/3 of people like got tested and say, you know what, like I need to get tested because I'm not sure. I may have AIDS. I'm not really sure what's going on. But then they never go back to find out what the results are. Well, why, right? Why are 1/3 of people avoiding information that's so important to their physical health? So anyway, you see fields like medicine and like all of these other areas borrowing from psychology. It's a really great kind of hub discipline because it is so incredibly applied. So whenever you hear a question like, why do people do that, right? Why did she break up with me? Why do people fall in love? Why is this person engaging in violence? Why is that person a school shooter? Like, what's going on? A lot of psychologists will answer that question on different levels of analysis, meaning that there's a lot of different answers for why people do the things that they do, which is like, no duh, right? People are complex. Some of the answers, depending on what type of psychologist you talk to, are going to focus on these kind of biological influences. So what makes people tick? Well, what neurons are firing in their brain? Like, do they have damage to a certain part of their brain? Are they having too much serotonin, not enough serotonin, right? Is there some sort of neurotransmitter that's causing them to act the way that they do, or feel the way that they do, or think the way that they do? It's possible someone has damage to their frontal lobe, right? When they were a kid, they kept hitting their head falling, hitting their head over and over again. And all of a sudden their personality starts to change. They don't feel empathy anymore. They don't feel remorse. They really struggle with perspective taking. All of that would be like a biological influence for why this person is so cruel and cold and kind of cutthroat in their job. Maybe reason why they're the way that they are is because of a biological influence. Another psychologist might focus on, well, people are the way that they are because of these kind of psychological influences. Think of cognitions, just a fancy word for how people think. What's that kind of voice in their head telling them? What's the first thing that comes in? Like, is this an opportunity or is this a threat? When you are, putting on clothes, for the day, why did you choose this versus that? Well, when I wear this, I feel cool, or when I wear that, I feel like I, look fat, or I feel like I don't measure up to other people's like comparisons. And, I don't want to be that person that sticks out in the crowd. All of that is like, what is this person thinking, right? What is that kind of voice in their head, that cognition that's causing them to make one choice versus another? So anyway, some behaviors can be explained by sort of psychological influences, kind of like within that individual, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? Other psychologists, like myself, as a social psychologist, tend to cluster over here, where when we explain humans' behavior, we tend to focus on social cultural influences, which is just a fancy way for the group. And people might dress that way because all their friends are. So they're feeling this sort of conformity pressures, for instance. Or, why does this person feel so pressured to go to med school? Well, maybe all their friends and family went to med school and had these sort of expectations that they'd be letting other people down. So social cultural pressures, how they're thinking about it, biological influences, all of these can be right. It's just different ways of explaining why people do the things that they do. So one example is, what's the trick to a long-lasting marriage? Like a really important question, right? For those of us that have been to weddings before, sometimes the DJ will get on the mic and say, like, the oldest couple on the dance floor, or like, leave if you've been married 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. And eventually it gets to like one couple who's been married the longest. And it's common to ask them, like, hey, what's the trick? Marriage is hard. Like, a lot of people are getting divorced. I don't want that. What's the trick to a long-lasting marriage? If you were to ask psychologists, what's the trick to a long-lasting marriage? Some psychologists would focus on the biological and say, well, it's all about oxytocin. There's a neurotransmitter coursing through your brain that makes you feel attachment, that makes you feel close and connected to other human beings. So when you see someone that you love, your body starts pumping out oxytocin that makes you connected to this person. When you hold their hand, when you engage in sexual intercourse and you orgasm, like, oxytocin is released. When a mother is breastfeeding her child, that sort of letdown of milk stimulates oxytocin to be released. So she starts attaching, right, liking her kid that she just gave birth to. When you come home from school and you see your dog and his tail's wagging like crazy, he's so excited to see you. That's because oxytocin is coursing through his brains. Like, he's attached to you. He was sad to see you leave. He's happy to see you come back because of the biological influences, those neurotransmitters. So it's probably not the most like romantic thing to say, hey, what's the trick to a long-lasting marriage? Oxytocin. But he's not wrong, right? There is a biological component to it. Other psychologists would say, well, the trick to a long-lasting marriage is communication or trust or compassion or empathy, or things like not going to bed angry and like kind of harping on that idea of like caring for your partner. All of those sort of like thoughts, empathy, compassion, trust are kind of psychological influences, kind of like within that person, how they kind of, think about the world that's affecting their likelihood of staying in a long-lasting marriage. Some other examples or some other influences for what's the trick to a long-lasting marriage? If you wait longer to get married, if your parents are married, if your friends are married, if you're religious, all of those things tend to correlate with longer lasting marriages. And it's all kind of getting at like, well, who are you surrounding yourself by? What are some of those kind of group or relational aspects to you that are changing your willingness to stay in this relationship long-term? We will talk a whole lot more about attachment and commitment and love and relationships along the way. And for all of these big questions, don't be surprised if there's more than one answer. This slide is just showing that there's a few different ways of kind of answering questions: biological, psychological, or social cultural. So at this point, I'm going to pause real quick. And what's nice about having this video on YouTube is if you need a break or you need to go back, you're more than welcome to pause it or jump back. At this point, I want to kind of pivot a little bit to like, what is psychology kind of all about? Like, what's its methodology? And one of the things I was harping on earlier is that it's not just psychology, it's psychological science. And we need psychological science. We need the research behind it, because you often can't trust people. Say, hey, well, why do you do that? People are really great at explaining their behavior, saying, I probably do this because fill in the blank. Is that true? Like, is that reason really causing their behavior? And what you find is that humans, people, cannot rely solely on their intuition and on common sense. There's so many common sense phrases that we throw around that are completely wrong. One of them is like opposites attract, right? You hear that over and over again. Oh, they're the yin to my yang. I'm introverted, they're really extroverted. So when we get together, we just complement each other so well, right? Opposites attract. No, that is completely wrong. And then after I share, like, hey, all of these studies, like the more similar in age you are to someone, the more likely your relationship is to last. The more similar you are in values to someone, the more likely your relationship is to last. The more similar your personality traits are, the more likely your relationship is to last. The more similar your social network is to their social network, the longer your relationship is to last. The way you talk, the words you use, the way you set up sentences, the more similar your speech is to your partner, the more likely you guys are to hit it off in the first place. Similarity breeds liking, not this opposites attract. So as soon as you hear that, it's like, oh yeah, of course, similarity breeds liking. That's obvious. It wasn't obvious until you learned about it, until you learned about the research. And that's where like false confidence, where like the things seem obvious after the fact, is called a hindsight bias, right? Our tendency to believe after learning an outcome that we could have predicted it. But no, like people feel this hindsight bias. The day after an election, it's like, oh, of course that person was going to win. Really? The night before, you were sweating bullets. You're like, I'm not really sure. It could be this person. It could be that person. I really don't know. It's kind of a tumultuous time. Who's going to win? I'm not really sure. Right? The day before the Super Bowl, you're like, I'm not really sure which team's going to win. They're both so good. They won so many games to get here. Then after the game, you're like, oh, of course that coach was going to outcoach the person. Of course that team was going to win. I should have known it all along. But you didn't. People don't. Right? They have this tendency to think that they would have known it all along, but they didn't. And that happens when you're reading your textbook. You're like, oh, of course people obey authority. Really? What would you think this person would do growing up in America as this individualist? They can wear whatever they want, say whatever they want, all these sort of freedoms. Are they going to be so easily conformed? on the front end, you're like, I'm not really sure how this is going to play out. I know conformity is a thing. I know their personality is to be an individual. What's going to happen here? Well, do the study. Put people in that room, survey them, see what happens. And then when you find out the results, share that with the field, and not let people just rely on this sort of hindsight bias where they think the field is more simple than it actually is. So how do psychologists kind of go about doing this scientific method? First of all, it's a process, right? A process of not just taking someone's word for it, but actually getting data back and testing your ideas about the world. So it involves identifying variables, finding out how to measure them, testing your hypotheses. Hypotheses are just your sort of predictions of what you think is going to happen. So it starts off with, what's going to happen? What's the problem, right? Why do people do this? I bet that, people feel better about themselves when they compare themselves to someone else or whatever. So you develop this sort of hypothesis, sort of prediction of, I bet people that compare themselves to this person are going to feel worse about themselves, but other people who compare themselves to something better are going to feel better or something, right? So you develop this sort of hypothesis of what you think is going to happen. And then you design the experiment. You put people in those different conditions and see what happens. You get the data back from them, you analyze it, and you figure out, was my hypothesis supported or not? If so, great, write it up, share it with the field. But if not, you're like, what's going on here? Maybe my hypothesis was wrong. Maybe I need to, think about this question differently to better understand and predict what people will say and do. So anyway, it's a process, and there are a variety of different scientific methods available to psychologists. And some of these terms that I'll use over and over again are like theory. And I'm sure you've heard the term theory before, right? In your other science classes. The formal definition is just this integrated set of principles that organize observations and predict behavior. Blah. What does that mean? Your theory is integrating these principles, right? These findings that pop up over and over and over again. So let's say you are kind of walking around the world, you're reading articles, and you find that when people compare their salary to people that make more than them, they tend to feel worse about themselves. Kind of interesting, right? That's a dot. That's a finding. Then later on, there's another study showing that when you compare your number of Instagram followers to someone else's, and they have more followers than you do and more friends than you do, you tend to feel worse about yourself, right? This sort of current research going about social networking sites and things like anxiety and self-esteem, makes people feel worse about themselves. Kind of interesting. And then you go to the basketball game on Friday night, and you look down the bench and you see one person who's scoring a ton of points, and they're like, oh, I scored so many more points than someone else did. And they start feeling really good about themselves. And you're like, okay, I have 3 different findings here. I have findings about people comparing salary, comparing friends, comparing points. And across all of those different studies, what we find is that when you compare your performance to other people, it changes how you feel about yourself. Interesting. So what if we created a theory, right? Like social comparison theory, and started connecting these dots across different venues, across salaries and points and friends? Doesn't matter what the comparison is. What if we created a social comparison theory that argued that when you compare your performance with someone who's doing better than you, you tend to feel worse about yourself. And when you compare yourself to someone who's doing worse than you, you tend to feel better about yourself. That's social comparison theory. So then later on, once you have this theory that integrates all of those sort of dots, all those findings that you've seen and read, then you can create a hypothesis. A buddy comes up to you, and says, hey, I am applying for grad schools or whatever. And I'm wondering if me and my friend apply to grad school and they get into 3 and I only get into 1, how is that going to make me feel? And you're like, oh, according to social comparison theory, right? I hypothesize, or I predict that if you compare your performance to someone who's doing better than you, you're going to feel worse about yourself. Great. All right. That's your prediction. That's your hypothesis. So these hypotheses stemmed from theories. And then once you've kind of established what your hypothesis or what your prediction is, then go do it, right? You keep talking about how people feel about themselves. Well, how are you going to operationally define that? What's your operational definition for like feelings about yourself? So you might start saying, well, I'm going to operationally define it as like self-esteem. Great. How are you going to measure self-esteem? Are you going to measure it as like some sort of survey? Just ask people, hey, on a 1 to 5 scale, how good of a person do you think you are? Or are you going to operationalize self-esteem as like how often they cry, right? When this person gets into 1 school versus the other person gets into 3, are you going to operationally define it as like how frequently this person looked at themselves in the mirror, or like how often they smile when they see pictures of themselves? Like, it's up to you, right? How are you going to kind of put numbers on that variable or that construct? How are you going to kind of define that operational construct for your study? And that's the fun, challenging part about psychology, is a lot of the variables that we are really excited about and passionate about, like prejudice and love and intimacy and trust. How do you measure that? Well, it's up to you, right? It's your job to create an operational definition. So let's say that you create all of these operational definitions, you manipulate your variables, and you find out, hey, my hypothesis was right. My prediction worked out the way I thought. Great. What you can do is do that study over and over again, a process called replication, to see, hey, does it work? Because sometimes you will run a study and your hypothesis might be wrong. You're like, man, does that mean the theory's wrong? Or does that mean that theory only applies to some people but not others? Maybe it doesn't work with like, Christian undergrads. Why is that? Maybe it doesn't work with college students. Why is that? Maybe it works with athletes but not, employees, right? Why is that? So what you can do is kind of replicate these findings to make sure that the field is showing the same pattern over and over and over again. And from time to time, theories might be wrong. Hypotheses might be disconfirmed. In fact, according to social comparison theory, what would happen if you had a younger sibling? You go to APU and they jump from high school and they get their first job at NASA right off the bat. How would that make you feel? According to social comparison theory, if you compare like, you studying at APU versus your sibling going to NASA or something like that, according to social comparison theory, if you compare yourself upwards, it should make you feel worse, right? It's like, man, that person's doing better than I am in life. You should feel worse about yourself. But what you find is the exact opposite. When people's siblings go to NASA and MIT and things like that, they tend to feel better about themselves. They start bragging that, hey, this is my brother who goes to NASA. That's my sister that goes to MIT. And they feel great about themselves, which is interesting, right? It doesn't really fit social comparison theory. They're comparing themselves upward, but they're feeling better. Why? Well, maybe if it's close others, if it is a close family member or a boyfriend or girlfriend, their successes, we can kind of bask in that reflected glory. Their successes are our success. So we feel better about ourselves for close others doing well. But if it's random strangers, that upward comparison makes us feel worse. So what you find is that theories are being kind of tweaked over time. They might change to kind of better explain all of these findings. Or if the theory doesn't hold up, you scrap it and go with a new theory that does a better job of explaining the data. So there are a few different places to go about kind of testing these psychological theories. The first one is like, where are you doing it, right? What's the location? Is it in a field or a lab setting? Your field settings are cool because it is real world. You are getting out there in the field, mirroring everyday life. So if you wanted to see like, do gender stereotypes about boy toys and girl toys affect what toys kids play with? What you could do is do a field study and go to a playground and see, all right, there's a bunch of kids out there. This is you being that sort of like creepy stalker, like watching all these kids play and say, all right, like this little boy's playing with this toy, little girl's playing with that toy. Does that fit my hypothesis? These field studies are really cool because they are so generalizable. A lot of generalizability because it's real life, real people at a real playground. Like it mirrors reality because it is reality. But because they have a lot of generalizability, they have almost no control. You can't control the weather. You can't control whether some little kid is being a jerk and is like pushing other kids off the playground. You don't know if some parents are going to be overbearing and like forcing their kids to play with certain toys. You have zero control of all those other sort of factors. So in field studies, you have a lot of generalizability, but little control. But if you want to instead have a lot of control and be able to say for sure that like this variable causes a change in another variable, the only way that you would have a lot of control to like really kind of pinpoint exactly what's going on in your theory is to do a lab study where you control everything. You bring a kid into a laboratory, all right, you sit them in this chair and you strap little cameras up to their eyes and you see what toys they look at. Do they look at a soccer ball or a, like a ballerina shoe, right? Something like that. And you might have a prediction that boys are going to look at soccer balls, girls are going to look at ballerina shoes. And you can look at that by seeing how long do boys versus girls look at one camera versus the other. A ton of control, right? You control the pictures, you control the time, the setting, the pictures in the room, like you control everything. But you have no generalizability because kids don't play with cameras on their heads and pictures of soccer balls, right? It doesn't mirror reality. So lab studies have a lot of control, but really little generalizability. So it's really a kind of trade-off between the two. Sometimes research psychologists are curious about just describing what people do, right? Just describing like what is, what percentage of people litter, what percentage of people lie, what percentage of people cheat on their partners. If you wanted to do some of this descriptive research where you aren't predicting, you're just describing what people are doing, you might do a naturalistic observation, which is the like creeper research method. You just follow people around. And you see patterns in the real world. You look at littering and you walk outside and you see how many people like drop their trash on the ground. If you're interested in PDA, right, public displays of affection, you sit in the back of a movie theater and you record on your stopwatch like how long couples are making out during the movie. That's weird. You're like in the back of this dark movie theater, like recording how long people make out. Like it's a weird thing to do. But you're getting a good kind of description of like, what are people doing in their natural habitat? Occasionally you can describe what people are doing from a really extreme instance, referred to as a case study. So every now and then there are really rare behaviors that happen, like a school shooting, like a terrorist attack. I wish they were even more rare than they unfortunately are. There's no way that you can recreate that in a laboratory, right? There's no ethical way for you to like recreate a terrorist attack or recreate a school shooting. That sounds horrifically unethical. So instead, what psychologists can do is a case study where they take this really rare event and they study that in vivid detail. So for instance, after the Columbine shooters, a lot of people, including psychologists, were wondering like, what happened? What was going on with those kids that made them want to shoot up their school? So what psychologists can do is a case study. They go to Columbine, they interview their friends, they interview their parents, they go rifle through their rooms, right? The Columbine shooters had kind of video blogs going, they had diaries, they're kind of looking through all of this sort of evidence and detail on these, like certain kids' life, just trying to figure out what's going on. And ironically, what they found is that the Columbine shooters didn't have really low self-esteem. They had exceptionally high self-esteem. They were narcissists. They had this kind of hollow sense of self. They thought that they were grandiose, kind of better than everyone else. They thought that they were God's gift. They thought that they could trick anybody out of everything, that after the Columbine shooters, they were writing in their diaries that they thought that Tarantino and Spielberg would be fighting over the rights to make Columbine the movie, right? They thought that they were God's gift. So what happens if you have this sort of narcissistic, inflated view of yourself, and then you get bullied, and then you have unrequited love, meaning you ask someone, hey, Becky, you want to go to prom? And she says, hell no, I'm not going to prom with you, right? And you're getting rejected, ostracized over and over and over again every single day. What you find that people that are narcissistic will use aggression to reestablish that positive view of themselves, which led to really interesting research about narcissism and aggression to better predict why some people are going to respond to aggression after they get, dumped by their girlfriend and other people don't. Another really interesting example of a case study would be someone like Jeannie Wiley. Jeannie had like the worst parents. She was 13 years old when her neighbors started hearing this animalistic scream coming from the house, and they called the cops, right? They weren't sure what was going on. The cops come and they find Jeannie, this 13-year-old little girl, locked in a closet. Her parents didn't talk to her, didn't interact with her. They chained her down to a high stool, or like a high chair, with a hole cut out on the bottom so she could kind of urinate and defecate. And they just, fed her food to keep her alive. They didn't talk to her. They didn't interact with her. They didn't smile at her. She didn't have any of the social interaction that all of us do. And after the cops found this, they immediately arrest the parents. But you have all these psychologists, including developmental psychologists, saying, will Jeannie ever be able to learn how to walk? Most kids learn how to walk like when they're about a year old, right? Will Jeannie ever be able to learn how to talk, right? You kind of figure out patterns of speech through interacting with other people around age 2 or so, right? 1 to 2. Will she ever be able to form friendships? Is she capable of showing empathy and perspective taking? Those are kind of developmental milestones, right? That kids learn throughout their lives, but Jeannie missed all that. So you have these developmental psychologists saying, well, is it like a use or lose it? Like, do you really have to learn these things in a certain window? And if you pass that window, then you're out of luck? Or can you learn how to walk and talk and form friendships throughout your entire life? And what they found is folks like Jeannie were able to learn how to walk, were able to learn how to talk, but it took her significantly longer than younger kids. So there is a developmental window where it's easier to learn how to walk and talk, but even if you don't, make it in that window, it doesn't mean that you're out of luck. It just takes longer. And what they did find is that Jeannie really struggled with social cues. She struggled to perspective take, show empathy, all those sort of nonverbal cues of like how long you stare at someone before looking away, like all of those sort of like social norms, she hadn't learned. So those took her significantly longer to pick up as well. And the Columbine shooter, the Jeannie story, like those are examples of case studies because they tell us something about people, right? Well, they tell us something about a person, and we're going to try and generalize, but that's a limitation. It's like you just have an N of 1. You just have one person that you are looking at and then saying, well, do all people act the same way? Presumably they should, but you don't really know until you survey a lot of people or do a study on a lot of people. But unfortunately, like there's no ethical way to like take a bunch of kids and lock half them up in a closet and let the other half live normal lives. Like ethically, you can't do that sort of research study to really pinpoint that variable. So the next best thing that you have is your case study. Let's see here. Another even more popular way of describing people is through survey research. You ask them, right? You mail them a survey, you send them an email with a survey link, you shoot a text message to their phone saying, hey, like, how do you feel about this issue? Who are you voting for? Which of these is most important to you, right? And what you're doing is you're asking questions that people can then share their beliefs, attitude, preferences, or even behaviors. Have you cheated on your spouse before? Like those sort of intimate, important questions they're telling about people. One of the best ways to actually figure out, what people are thinking, what they're feeling, what they're doing, is just ask them and create an environment where they don't feel compelled to lie, which is a lot easier said than done. So like if you're working with kids, for instance, you might use a Likert scale saying, hey, on a 1 to 5 scale, how are you feeling? And the kid's like, what? What does a 1 feel like? What's a 5 feel like? So instead, you might use a survey methodology with like pictures, right? Which picture best expresses how you're feeling right now? Things like that. All sorts of clever ways of getting data back. And with any survey, with any sort of study, you have to be really careful about the way you word your questions. You can frame options, pro-life, pro-choice, or both sound pretty good. Like, life is good, choices are good, right? Framing it in such a way that it seems more appealing than others. Milk. Do you want milk that's 2% fat-free versus 98% fat? You're like, oh, I'm not drinking 98% fat. That sounds gross, right? 2% fat-free is the same thing, right? But just you frame it in a little bit of a different way, you can change people's responses pretty drastically. And a great example of the importance of wording these questions is in countries like America, where we're curious and worried about like organ donors. When people, first drive, they go to the DMV, they get their driver's license. One of the questions that the person at the DMV will ask is, hey, do you want to be an organ donor? Meaning when you die, after you pass away, can the doctor, send your heart to someone else in need? Can they send those organs to other people that need them to survive? And the way that question was worded in America, like ours, is, hey, you're not an organ donor right now, but do you want to be one? You can opt in if you want to. And what we find out is in the United States, about 15% of people are organ donors. So not a huge number. But in other countries like Germany, they also have DMVs, right? And at the DMV, right, when the people come in, they say, hey, like by default, everyone's an organ donor, but you can opt out if you want to. Meaning you don't have to let other people have your organs after you die. Do you want to opt out? What you find out is about 90% of people in Germany say, no, I want to be an organ donor. I'm good. I don't want to opt out. So check out that difference. 90% of people in Germany are organ donors, where less than 15% of people in America are organ donors. Is it because Germans are just so much more helpful than Americans? Well, probably not. Instead, it's probably more about the way that you worded that question. Opt in versus opt out. It changes people's behavior in a really meaningful way. And like applying psychology in this way, think about how many millions of people's lives that you're saving every single year by just having these extra organs around. So you have descriptive research where you just describe what are people doing. The other type of research out there is more about kind of predicting, like what's going on. Is there a relationship between these variables that's meaningful? One popular research methodology is a correlational research study. And in correlational research studies, what they'll do is say, is one variable related to another variable? Is money related to happiness, right? If only I had more money, would that make me more happy? Or if I had less money, would I be less happy? What they're kind of curious about is there a relationship between these two variables? So what you can do is go around and ask people, right? You give them a survey and you say, hey, how much money do you make on a 0 to 100 scale? How happy are you? So you ask, someone in downtown Azusa, hey, how much money do you make? Make $20,000. Great. 0 to 100 scale, how happy are you? I'm a 20. It's like, okay, right? That dot of like $20,000, 20 happiness points, that dot reflects that individual person's responses. And then you walk up to someone else. And for some random reason, like Oprah Winfrey, whatever, is hanging out in downtown Azusa. You're like, hey, what's up, Oprah? How much money do you make? Well, she has like $1 billion. Okay, she has $1 billion. 0 to 100 scale, how happy are you? She's a 99. Okay, great. So you start asking a bunch of people, you start getting all of these sort of data points. And you start realizing that, hey, there seems to be a relationship between these two variables. That relationship or association is referred to as a correlation. And correlational research is really common because it is straightforward and easy to do. It allows us to answer these questions. Is social status related to health? Is money related to happiness? Is a parent's personality related to their child's personality traits? All of those sort of questions are really meaningful. But you have to be really cautious because correlation does not equal causation. Say it with me, as weird as it sounds, talk to your computer screen. Correlation does not equal causation. Correlation does not equal causation, meaning that just because there's a correlation between two variables, it doesn't mean that one causes the other. You know, if you find that there is a correlation between money and happiness, it's not saying that, hey, if you give someone more money, then that's going to cause them to be happy. It could be the other way around. It could be, hey, like, let's make someone more happy. Does that cause them to earn more in their jobs? Well, maybe. Or maybe there's something else. Maybe there's a third variable that you didn't account for that's influencing both, like the location that they live in, right? Maybe they live in California where wages tend to be higher and it's really sunny, so people are happy all the time. Maybe kind of weather and location affects both of these variables. Maybe. So because there's all these other variables that you didn't account for or control for, if you just have correlational evidence, you can't say one variable causes another. This is never more true than, I kid you not, there is a correlation out there between ice cream sales and aggression. So the number of ice cream sold in an area is positively correlated with the number of violent crimes in that area, meaning that the more ice cream sold, when that goes up, the more fights go up. Does that mean that like ice cream causes aggression? Well, maybe, but maybe not. Like, we can't say for a fact one variable causes another just based on correlation. It's not like, man, I just ate all this ice cream, I want to go punch somebody. Or it could be the exact opposite. Man, I just got in so many fights, I could really cool down with some ice cream. Does aggression cause ice cream sales? Maybe, right? It's hard to tell which direction the effect is going. Or maybe there's a third variable, like, is it hot outside? And when it's hot outside, people buy more ice cream. When it's hot outside, people get more frustrated, more interpersonally, like they get into more altercations. More people are at the beach, more people are outside, people hot and sticky and sweating and uncomfortable, leading to more fights. So just from the correlational study, you can't show a cause and effect because there might be third variables out there that are unaccounted for. Like in the number of churches in an area is correlated with the amount of theft reported in that area. It doesn't mean that, man, there's so many churches around, I need to go steal something. That doesn't make sense. Or, man, I've stolen so many things, I need to build more churches. That doesn't make sense either. Maybe there's a third variable that we didn't account for, like population size. That, hey, if we live in like a really populated area, there's going to be a lot of churches, and there's also going to be a lot of theft, crimes of opportunity when there's that many people around. Which is correlational studies are important because they show something is going on. There is a relationship between these two variables, but they don't show a causal relationship. They don't show cause and effect. The only way that you can show cause and effect is by doing the paragon of of research methods and the experiment. The experimental design is the only way to show that one variable causes a change in a second variable. And in an experimental design, what you will do is at least have two variables, one that you think is going to cause a change in the other variable. And what you're going to do is manipulate one and then measure the outcome to see, is there a change in it? So specifically what you would do in an experimental design, if you wanted to run an experiment, you would start with your population. All the people, who are you interested in? Well, I'm interested in like all Americans. It's like, all right, that's millions and millions of people. It's like, all right, you are not surveying 1 million people for your study. Let's say your population is like everyone at APU. Great, that's 10,000 people that go to APU. There's no way you're going to survey all 10,000 people from that population. So instead, what you would do is take a random sample from that population. So instead of, inviting all 10,000 people to be a part of your study, what you would do is randomly sample 100 people, for instance. And that word random is meaningful here. Random means that everyone in the population, all 10,000 people, had an equal chance of being a part of your study. So what you would do is like write all 10,000 people's names down in a hat and pick them randomly. Or, get a random number generator and randomly pull 100 people's student ID numbers, right? And then once you have 100 people in your sample that were randomly sampled from the population, then what you are going to do is randomly assign them to at least two groups, Group A and Group B. And again, the word random is meaningful here. Random meaning all 100 people had the same equal chance of being in Group A or Group B. So the way that you would do this random assignment, is by flipping a coin. Heads, you're in Group A, tails, you're in Group B. And the reason why this is so important is on the front end, Group A is exactly the same as Group B. 50 people in Group A, 50 people in Group B. But because they were randomly assigned to those two groups, Group A and Group B are pretty similar to each other, right? There's some morning people in Group A and there's some morning people in Group B. There's some like jerks in Group A and there's some jerks in Group B. There's some psychopaths in Group A and there's some psychopaths in Group B, right? Those groups, because we use random sampling and random assignment, they're equal before the study even starts. So now that the two groups are pretty much equal to each other, what we can do is treat one group differently than another group. What we are going to do is manipulate what's called the independent variable. Manipulate something for one group, but not the other. So if we wanted to see, does temperature cause aggression? Cause being the operative word. What we could do is take Group A and treat them a certain way. Put them in a room that's 130 degrees, right? It's just boiling in there. And then Group B, put them in a normal room, 70 degrees. So one group has one experience and the other group doesn't, often called the control group. And then we measure some sort of outcome. In this case, we were wondering whether temperature causes aggression. How are you going to operationally define aggression? Are you going to ask people how aggressive do they feel? Sure. Or do you want to use a behavioral measure? Do you want them to play Monopoly and then record how many times they flip the table? Or do you want them to pretend to do a boxing exercise and you record like how many times they punch the punching bag and with how much force they punch the punching bag. However you want to get that sort of outcome of aggression, let's say that Group A in the 130 degree room was far more aggressive, right? They flipped a lot more tables, they punched the bag a lot more often than Group B. Because the two groups differ from each other on the outcome now, we can be confident that the only reason why they differ is because Group A was in a 130 degree room and Group B was in a 70 degree room. Temperature was the only thing that varied between the two groups, right? Temperature was the independent variable. So when you manipulate temperature and you see a change in the outcome or dependent variable, then you can be confident that temperature causes aggression. And experimental design is the only way to show that. But this is a lot of work, right? It takes a lot of time to, randomly sample 100 people, set up that study, change the temperatures, measure aggression in a realistic way. That's a lot of work. So what most people do is they start with a correlation. They'll start with a correlational study, say, hey, how hot was it today? How angry do you feel? And what they'll start with like a quick little survey, ask some questions and see if those two variables are correlated. If there is a correlation between two variables, then there could be a causal relationship. But if there's no correlation, there will never be a causal relationship. Think of it this way, as the harder you press down on the accelerator in your car, the harder you press, the faster you go. So there's a correlation, right, between like the harder you press down on that accelerator and your speed, right? There's a correlation there. The only way that you would show like that one causes the other is by doing an experiment where after you know that there's a relationship between those two variables, then you would follow it up with an experiment. One group presses down on the lever and the other group doesn't. And you see which group goes faster. That experimental design is the only way to show cause and effect. But before you go through all the work of an experiment, if there's no correlation between the two variables, don't waste your time. In this study, if these two groups differed, right? If we show that temperature causes aggression, then there will always be a correlation between temperature and aggression as well. So both designs go kind of hand in hand. Correlations are easier to do, but they don't show cause and effect. Experiments are much harder to do, but they're the only research design that lets us show cause and effect. So let's say we have this research question. Does having control over one's environment cause elderly people to live longer? What you would do is start with your population, all the old people in America, right? Or all the old people in Southern California, right? And then you'd randomly sample 100 or whatever, or 200, randomly sample them. And then once you have your random sample, you're going to flip a coin, send half to group A, half to group B. And then you're going to manipulate control to see if control causes them to live longer. One group, you're going to give control, and the other group, you are going to give them no control. So if this was your study, how would you operationally define control? Right? What's it like to be an old person living in a retirement community, for instance? One group could have control, and they could say, hey, this is your room. Decorate it however you want. This is the TV. Turn it to whatever channel you want, the volume, whatever channel you want, whatever volume you want. Here's the menu for today. Choose whatever you want to eat. You have control. There's a plant. Water it whenever you want. Put it wherever you want to. You have control over your life. In the other condition, you say, hey, today is like meatless Monday. We're having veggie lasagna. No options. There's the thermostat. It is always going to be 75 degrees in here. You cannot touch it at all. There's the TV, but the remote's broken and you have to watch exactly what's on there. There's a plant on the wall. I will water it for you. You don't touch that plant. You don't move the plant. You have no control over your life at all. You're just kind of living there. And then the dependent variable, they followed them 3 months later to see, what was their mortality rate? How many people died within 3 months of living in this kind of convalescent home? And what they found is this. The population was elderly people living in a retirement community, so people are going to die later on in life. What you find is that when old people have control over their environment, 15% die within 3 months. But if they have no control over their environment, 30% died within 3 months. So because you use all of this control, you did this experiment, you manipulated just one variable at a time, giving control versus not, you can now say that having control over one's environment causes people to live longer, which is wild, right? That's a really important finding. So you'll see these experiments throughout Psych, throughout our semester. I'll talk about a lot of findings, and I'll use terms like variables and cause and effect and things like that. So it's important to know the different research methods available. And one of the things in psychology is because we're interested in a lot of pretty sensitive questions like love and cheating and hatred and prejudice and discrimination and aggression, like you have to be really careful that the participants in your studies, that their rights are being accounted for, meaning that you can kind of do no harm to them. There are instances where you can put them in realistic settings that might be a little distressing, but you have to then kind of make sure by the end of the study that whatever you put them through was justified. So it was justified and minimal. So for instance, as a social psychologist, I often ask people about racism. And if I say, hey, are you racist? Go figure, no one's racist, right? I know they're lying through their teeth, right? We know that racism exists. We see the discrimination. We see the prejudice when they feel like no one's looking. So instead of saying, hey, you want to do this survey about racism, and you know they're going to lie through their teeth, what if I did a study about their social attitudes, and they rate how much they like each one of these groups on a 0 to 100 scale, and it's just a social attitude. It's not racism. By wording it that way, I'm kind of deceiving them a little bit. I'm using deception, and that's justified on the rare instances where if I were to tell them the whole truth, then that would bias their responses, right? That would cause them to lie through their teeth and not report accurately. So what you'll often see is, even though deception is not common in research, certain fields like social psychology, when you ask about prejudice and things like that, you might have to use a little deception. You might have to mislead participants a little bit. In this class, we will talk about some studies. Some of them use a lot of deception, right, where they really mislead participants. And you can do that, but it has to be minimal and it has to be justified. And then at the end of every study, you need to debrief your participants. You need to make sure that they understand exactly what the study was all about. If there was any deception, you need to pull back the curtain. You need to tell them everything that happened and how they were randomly sampled and randomly assigned and like why they had to be in this condition, right? And why your research question was so important. So whenever you're coming up with a research study that you want to do, to make sure that you are taking into account participants' rights, that you aren't going crazy with the deception, right? It's minimal and justified, to make sure that you have a debriefing in there, that participants know exactly what really happened in that study. Every university has an IRB, or an institutional review board, which is just a bunch of faculty members that come together and they have to essentially approve any study that takes place on that campus, because it's their job to make sure that the participants' rights are taken into account. And one of the things that the IRB looks for is at the beginning of every study, there was an informed consent form. That page that says, what is this about? Do I get paid for this? How long is this going to take? What are my rights? Can I leave at any time? Right? It lays it all out for them. Because the last thing that you want to do is have people participate in a study that they didn't consent to. They didn't know that they were going to learn if they're capable of killing another human being or not, which some social psychology studies have done that before, where you put people in a situation where they think that they're killing someone else. They aren't, right? They're using deception, but they think that they are, right? And that's really distressing to participants. They didn't consent to that, right? They didn't know on the front end that this is what they were signing up for. So anyway, the IRB is looking at every study saying, does it have an informed consent form? Is there deception? If so, was it minimal and was it justified? And is there a debriefing at the end where you explain exactly what was happening to those sort of participants along the way? So let me pause there. And that's the lecture that I will be covering in class on week 1. And if you have any questions at all along the way, feel free to reach out to me in week 2. I'm more than happy to chat, or shoot me an email. I can handle questions that way, or even set up a Zoom office hour meeting for you. So anyway, that was week 1, and I will see you guys later. Take care.